For nearly as long as my brain is willing to remember, there's existed a causticity deep within my heart and my mind. A gnawing, tormenting little shit of a brain gremlin. An insistent whisper breathing down the base of my neck. Lucah, born of a dream, reached out to these fears, embraced them, and immersed me within them in a way I've never truly experienced before. To the anxious, the outcast, the traumatized, the struggling, the recovering, the backsliding, the lost, Lucah can feel like disinfectant on an open wound. And it is easily one of the greatest games I have ever played. Before we go any further, if it's not already apparent, this game deals with several heavy subjects: intense violence, abuse, suicide and self-harm, dysphoria, dysmorphia, dead naming, and more, most of which is towards children. It's also especially important to note that this game should be avoided at all costs by the photosensitive. Flashing lights abound and are integral to the game's presentation. As much as I wish a photosensitivity-friendly mod of this game existed, some of the flashing effects are too baked into the game for me to even imagine how that would be accomplished. And this is ultimately the game's biggest failing, the single largest mark I have against it. It's especially disappointing when you consider just how well Lucah does accessibility on almost all other fronts, but I don't know what else to say about the topic other than this game deserves some sort of mod to make it more accessible to people sensitive to flashing lights, and I'm just putting it out into the ether that that should happen, and if there's a fund to donate to in order to make that happen, I'm all sorts of down. With that warning and pretty much my only criticisms of the game out of the way, hi, I'm Phirmth, and I want to get you to play Lucah, Born of a Dream. A little background before we get started. Iron Pineapple has a great YouTube channel with a fantastic series on obscure Souls-likes, and during one of his entries, he showed off this game. I promptly said, whoa, that looks sweet, saw it was on Steam sale, heard him get as far as saying,
alright, straight up, this is a great game,
and decided I should play this shit on stream. I like going into games as blind as possible when I can, and this game seemed to be criminally obscure and ludicrously up my alley. I had no idea how right I was on both those counts. Anyways, I'll be using footage from my Twitch playthrough for this video because I already have it and I have so many other videos to make, and fuck it was good enough to make me cry, it's good enough for you fuckos. Deal with it. And also, deal with the art style if you don't like it. This is the biggest and most obvious place for people to potentially be turned off by this game, so I want to sing its praises first. In a lot of ways, Lucah looks exactly like the scribblings from an emo kid's Naruto journal in middle school, but that ends up being integral to the atmosphere, the mindset it gets you into, and it's so ripe for distortion. As enemies and environments become more abstracted, you're pulled deeper into that lingering whisper of the doom that awaits you just around the corner. You're never sure when all hell will break loose, when you'll be plunged into something you're completely unprepared for. But you know that it's coming. The world is breaking. You are breaking, but all you can do is move forward. Sometimes the only way out is through. It's also worth noting that the art style's abstractions never come at the cost of gameplay. Rocks and trees and trailer parks are all legible, comprehensible, even safe. There's a security you'll come to appreciate in being able to understand your surroundings in more concrete terms than dangerous frontiers and impenetrable darkness. Even some of the less literal depictions make intuitive sense. When you step into a building whose walls are just disjointed spatterings of crucifixes, there's no question of where you are. Enemies fare even better. I can't tell you exactly what any of these nightmares are, but there's no doubt about what this guy's arms do or that these guys might be weirdly mobile. This thing floats around and shoots projectiles and teleports, and I can't tell you why, but it looks exactly like a thing that would do that. And speaking of projectiles, how about that signaling on almost all attacks? Should not have let myself get caught by that. That was dumb. Like, these hitboxes are so clear and obvious, and even if enemies didn't have this big orange graphic over them before attacking, they still have distinct startup frames you can look out for. Most projectiles are visible for a few frames before going active. AoEs tell you how much ground they cover before going off, vulnerable states are highlighted with visual indicators, and a sound cue that gets me just fucking hard. Okay, I can live with that. You might have also noticed by now that the combat looks kinda crispy. Let's set the trauma aside for a second and talk about the primo shit. That good, that trichome-caked Bloodborne Bayonetta hybrid. Lucah's combat whips ass, and not just the self-flagellators. Rapture! Oh yeah, they're into it. Okay, if you're not totally sold on Lucah yet, this is where the fun really starts. Get this, Soulsborne combat, but make it good. I'm being reductive here, but it really does take the same basic combat skeleton that FromSoft has been working with for decades and injects it with a red-hot shot of character action supremacy. It's a great spot for the game to wear its influences on its sleeve, and this is where it becomes obvious that Lucah stands on the shoulders of giants. So yeah, you have your standard light and heavy attacks and a dodge with iframes all connected to a stamina gauge. If you hold dodge, you go into a sprint, which in this case is a sweet Naruto run that actually speeds you up enough to be fun to use in combat. Look how I run. Run like a fucking freak. Your attacks don't use traditional weapons, just waves of raw energy, and it's here that the art style can't hide the animator's talents. These attacks are visceral, violent, raw, edgy, but heartbreakingly sincere outbursts of emotion, and are wholly, uniquely Lucah. These waves come in several varieties known as mantras, each with their own range, damage, speed, and their own separate light and heavy attacks. String together light attacks and you get a basic combo string with a finisher, interrupt with a heavy and you'll get a new finisher depending on where in the combo you were. In a nod to Bayonetta, you can equip your light and heavy attacks separately and swap between the two sets instantaneously, which does a ton to open up your options in combat. Suddenly, these energy waves become melee and ranged combat in one, the hitbox abstracted to its purest, most functional form, seamlessly transitioning between opening up your enemies from afar and darting in to finish them off. The sound design and jarring lighting effects work with the animation to give combat a desperate energy, whether you're panicking as you struggle to drive back the nightmares or staring them down in the face, tearing them apart along with reality itself. Come on. Yes! The roll has its own quirks as well, namely a grace period of sorts when you mistime a dodge, during which you won't dodge right through an enemy attack, but instead be put into a sort of block stun. You don't take any damage, but the attack will still push you, which can put you into a disadvantageous position. This actually makes the game more forgiving, but in a way that reminds you that you just almost got hit. You aren't truly punished, but that little movement where you lose control of your character jackhammers on the panic button and keeps the anxiety levels climbing. And then there's the parry, because of course this game has a parry. You just dodge directly into an enemy's body during the startup of their melee attack, and bam, big opening for big damage. Much like the rest of Lucah's systems, it is intuitive, seamless, visceral, satisfying, and incredibly refined. And that's just what they've done with the baseline gameplay. There's more. Look at these small, funny guys. Gaze upon this young scrunklo. Seek ye the comforts of a garden of silly little dudes. These are familiars, and they're great. They follow you around and shoot nightmares on command, providing both emotional and range support in countless varieties. You have your standard shots, your shotgun blast, burst fire, cannonball, and more. And best of all, it's tied to one of my favorite things to see in an action game, a meter that goes up when you hit things. Why yes, meter that goes up when you hit things, thank you! I would love to be rewarded for my aggression with a resource that allows me to be even more proactive in combat. Thank you, meter that goes up when you hit things. It's called charge, and firing your familiar costs charge, and you build it up by landing light and heavy attacks. You know what your familiar doesn't cost? Stamina! And there's your central combat loop. Use your stamina attacking and dodging, and then fall back, keeping up the offense with your familiar via the charge you just built up. By the time you're low on charge, you have more attacking juice, and the waltz glides on. You also quickly unlock hold actions, essentially a super move if you charge up either your light or heavy attack for a second or two. These cost stamina and charge, and are unique to each weapon. Combined with an enemy roster that's solid if a touch lacking on variety, you have the makings of a fluid, expressive combat system where your build doesn't matter as much as the on-the-fly decisions you make. At any given frame, you have near instantaneous access to 2 full sets of light and heavy attacks, 2 familiars, and up to 4 hold actions, a multifaceted defensive option, and your items. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to use one of them right now. Oh, there are items. This is still a Souls-like. We still have an Estus Flask, though uses of it are incredibly limited. To supplement this, in swoops the Remind. Fuck. To supplement this, in swoops the Rewind. So, you've started off your fight on the wrong foot. You're not used to this enemy type yet, you got cocky and messed up a couple parries. You're not necessarily dying, but it hasn't been that long since the last bonfire, and you don't want to waste a flask just yet. You can do better. So, you reset it. Pop a rewind and you'll start at the beginning of the fight. These levels aren't Soulsborne in terms of enemy layouts. They use DMC-style arenas, locking you into a neutral playing field and then pitting you against potentially multiple waves of enemies. A rewind gives you a second, third, or potentially 7th chance at a sloppy fight, restoring you and the enemies to the state you were in at the start of the encounter or wave. The checkpoints it works with are actually pretty generous. You'll even get back any flasks you've used, which took me embarrassingly long to realize. A rewind is not as free as a heal. You still have to earn back whatever progress you'd gained before using it, but it taps into that looming sense of anxiety. Mistakes are costly. Erase them now before they hurt you in the future. Restart the fight, immediately get hit, restart it again, whatever it takes to make it to the next bonfire. Oh, these guys kick my ass! Oh, that's so much... Oh yeah, that's so many resources we just lost, and that percentage do be climbing ominously higher. Oh shit, we don't actually lose our souls when we die, nice. You actually don't drop your experience upon death, there are simply other consequences. Ever present. Waiting. You still want to visit these crunkly crucifixes regularly as they provide full heals, refreshes of your items, and the opportunity to level up. Selecting an attribute to increase will shuffle your options for the next level, a clever way to allow players to build their character as they want while preventing tunnel vision. If you want even more customization, you can get into the game's virtues, which grant you special passive bonuses like a perk system, except, you know, good. These aren't a 10% increase to backstab damage. They aren't a prerequisite for a set bonus. These are fundamental mechanics that significantly inform your approach to combat. Bam! Bloodborne Rally. Bam! Umbran Spear. Bam! Magic Pixel. Bam! Key Pulse. The team have clearly played a ton of good action games and paid tribute to all of them herein. They aren't simply aping other games here, though, to be clear, even if they were, that wouldn't be a problem. Each mechanic is adapted and balanced for the game and its systems, and there are plenty of original inclusions while we're at it. I particularly like this one that fully refills your charge upon inflicting a break on an enemy, letting you take full advantage of their vulnerable state. They're all really solid pieces of game design, somehow coexisting within an already airtight combat system. A system you will push to its limits, and it you, because as it turns out, this game gets hard. Fuck. No! Oh no! Those lingering consequences start to build up, and you get closer and closer to finding out what awaits you at 100%. All the while, enemies start hitting harder, the waves get more relentless, bosses get more phases, your journey between bonfires more treacherous, your anxieties more present. And I just died. Oof. And if this all sounds intimidating to you, if the story and the art style and the concept of the combat intrigue you, but this talk of systems and punishing deaths overwhelms you, this is where the aforementioned stellar accessibility concessions come in. Again, it sucks that this game's graphics render it unplayable for the photosensitive, and I dearly hope somebody capable of remedying that comes along. Dearly. But Lucah manages to signal its intended difficulty while making concessions for all players, and in a far more comprehensive way than I have ever seen. So when you boot up the game, you actually get 2 axes upon which to base your difficulty: sin and punishment. One determines enemy health, the other determines player vulnerability. Such a simple, retroactively obvious way of making difficulty more granular. There are multiple ways for a game to be hard. If you change your mind later on, you can switch this over in the options menu, along with speeding up or slowing down the game by 10%. If that weren't enough, you can hop into the equipment menu and customize your entire UI, and while you're at it, you might discover a slew of additional difficulty modifiers. Weaker enemies, significantly more health, unlimited charge and/or stamina, all accessible on a whim. If finishing a game on its intended difficulty means something to you, as it does to me, then that's discouragement enough from dipping into these, but this game isn't snobbish. It can present a harsh struggle and give all players the necessary tools to get what they want out of the experience. A player who gives themselves an easy, God mode playthrough of the game might be tempted to try it out for real later. I love hard games, and I can't speak to just how much in terms of development resources these options actually took up, but Lucah only stands to benefit from these inclusions. They don't just benefit newer players either. Turning on unlimited stamina and charge can really spice up a hard mode playthrough for people who have already beaten the game. Either way, these are some of the best accessibility options I've seen for a game, period. And it's a shame a tiny, nearly unheard of indie game like Lucah is practically leading the industry on this front. In fact, the list of trigger warnings I brought up at the start was mostly taken from the game's own trigger list, linked in a pastebin in the game's own description on the Steam store. And that's incredible, even if it shouldn't be. Frankly, it's another thing that, upon a little bit of consideration, should probably be industry standard at this point. That, or some sort of centralized database for game trigger warnings beyond doesthedogdie.com. Even if I wouldn't personally be making use of this, I did stream the game, and being able to link the trigger warning list to my chat helped ensure that nobody was showing up for something they weren't prepared for. As abstract as this game's storytelling can be, there's no denying it plunges directly into some potentially traumatic territory. Much like the difficulty options, the game only stands to gain from this, and more should follow its example. So are you gonna play it? Sounds pretty fucking cool, right? It plays really good, and it's really, really neat, and please do not make me sell you any harder on this game. It broke my heart. Please don't make me talk about the parts of it that broke my fucking heart. I'm gonna talk about some of the shit that ended up breaking my heart. If I've convinced you to play Lucah, go on, git. If you still need a bit of prodding, we're going to get into some narrative spoiler territory here, and while the game is painted in broad, abstract strokes, that makes an uninformed playthrough all the more valuable in my opinion. Please, I am begging you, go on and play it and interpret things as you see fit. And if any of you are still around, well, we're not spoiling the whole thing here. Not nearly. You are Lucah, or whatever name you choose. You wake up on a mysterious shore, a hovering shade lamenting your arrival. You are marked, the one virtue you cannot remove, and thus, doomed to be haunted by the nightmares. You fight your way as best as you can across the inhospitable wilderness, pushed ever forward by an impenetrable darkness, paths occasionally crossing with other children, lost much as you, joining with them, defending yourselves, waves of youthful angst rending anything that threatens you. Small, tattered wisps of wings float behind you. You might be angels, or maybe you were. The landscape is tattered, buildings bereft of life, save for enclaves of religious zealots, offering salvation. Let the spirit come in. But this is not the freedom you seek. You press on. Some other children don't feel like cooperating. Some of them are resigned to an inevitable grudge. You can have a moment of peace, but ultimately, violence reigns. Sometimes you're in luck. Sometimes you're saved. Lily decides to help you when the odds become insurmountable. Lily even accompanies you for a while, fighting alongside you, but she's oddly standoffish. She calls you Natalie at one point. Sorry, that's not the name you go by anymore. Now, is it? She watches you clear out room after room of nightmares and wonders out loud if it's even worth it at this point. The percentage is climbing higher. There can't be that much left for you. Succumbing is inevitable. Why are you torturing yourself, trying to fight it like this? At a certain point, she's had it. Lily has to leave. She apologizes, though It's hard to say with certainty that she means it. She just doesn't get you anymore. And now you're alone. You're alone, and it hurts. God, it hurts, but you keep moving forward. The only way out is through. Towards the end of your journey, there's a final hooded figure promising you salvation if you just give in. Take him up on his offer, and he'll top off the rest of that rapidly filling bar for you. And then, well, you awaken as a figure only vaguely familiar to you as the player, only shown to you as a ghost of your own past. You're Natalie, and there's nowhere to go but down, down, down until you find none other than yourself. Broken, hobbled, pathetic, a mockery of what you could have been. At this point, all that's left is a mercy killing. Natalie should be relieved, but she isn't. Yeah, I'm assuming giving in was not the right move. She doesn't feel anything. The game ends. Credits roll. And a voice reaches out to tell you it doesn't have to end this way. There is a way out. You can find it. So you start New Game Plus, and now the game really begins. Unlike before, you have an opening cutscene this time, performed almost entirely through text with the occasional minimal imagery and a lush rainforest of chilling sound design. And now you finally have context, more than you were anticipating, and as your understanding grows, so does your heartbreak, until... Once you finally wake up on that shore again, you still don't have a full grasp on what's going on. And you never will. But you know enough to keep fighting, enough to know that it's worth struggling for a happy ending. You deserve it at this point. New Game Plus comes with its own host of additions. Enemies hit harder, every bit of damage you take increases your corruption, which is already rising at a much faster pace. You need all of your unlocks from the first playthrough to stand a chance. You need to use every rewind you have. You cannot afford mistakes. You can even revert to earlier parts of the game to try and get through a level with a lower corruption rate, just to have a chance at the end game. You can unlock new mantras and familiars. You can discover brand new cutscenes filling out far more of your understanding of the world, or maybe completely different worlds altogether. It's always hazy, it's always murky, and it always feels like something you couldn't experience anywhere else but Lucah. And you will struggle. You will suffer. You will think you're doing well and breezing through encounters before a bad wave forces you to reset the entire chapter. You will think you comprehend the game's wider world until you uncover a narrative segment that seems to have come entirely out of nowhere. Every piece of progress, of understanding you earn, feels all the more precious, because you get the sense that it could be taken from you at any point. And yet, the accessibility options are there. If the anxiety, the failure, the time limits are too much for you, but you absolutely have to know how this ends, if you still feel satisfied just getting to and witnessing those scenes, you can. Because of that, and because of the words the game's devs grant you upon finishing New Game Plus, I can safely say that despite its brutal difficulty, despite the miasma of pressure and despair that it forces you to wade through, despite the hope it gives you and summarily takes away, despite the trauma it is saturated with, Lucah, Born of a Dream might still be one of the kindest games I have ever experienced. It's rare to get to undergo a work of art that's so clearly, dearly personal. It's even rarer for it to be so masterful on so many levels. Few games manage to engage my gamer brain on the level of The Wonderful 101 or God Hand, and few pieces of media manage to lay an anchor in the depths of my heart the way something like Serial Experiments Lane or John Darnielle's Master of Reality has. And yet, here exists the rare work that managed to do both and more. An unassuming, criminally under-discussed set of scribbles buried in the most obscure recesses of the Steam store. Even if this game will never reach the critical acclaim it warrants, the entire team at Me Less Than 3, at the very least, deserves to be phenomenally proud of making one of the most cohesive, engaging, kinetic, and empathetic works I have ever experienced within this medium. Thank you to the entire team at Me Less Than 3 for making this game. And thank you for watching.